Welcome to our exploration of Luke's second volume of Luke's authorship contained in the Christian Library. Same theme as the first volume. That is, Jesus cutting the strings that were attached to him, saying, No, 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 you don't have to do that. All you have to do is live the life of agape love. And all these strings would bind them to the law, attach them to the traditions, the historic prejudices, and all these things we've talked about. But in the second volume, this same theme continues. uh, the question was, would the early movement of the followers of Jesus, would this early movement be attached to the authority of the Jewish faith? Now, last week we looked at Pentecost and all that meant, and the gift of the Paraclete, the gift of the advocate beside us, um, advocating for the life of agape love. This week, in the context of that one big first story of Pentecost, we're going to look at a series of short stories included in chapters 2 through 7, which represent the early movement of the apostles, the sent ones, cutting the string from the long-standing authority in the Jewish faith community. That was the Jewish Council, which had absolute authority to determine the correct interpretation of the law to assure that all Jews would remain obedient to the law. Well, what was immediately at stake after the death of Jesus, according to Luke, was whether or not the Jesus movement would be an experience of faith within the Jewish community. Jesus and the 12 disciples were Jews. Luke's stories about Jesus represented how he, one by one, cut the strings attached to him because he was a Jew. This is represented in the tension Jesus continually had. Remember, had tension with the Pharisees, the Sadducees, the ruling Sanhedrin, the Jewish council of leadership. They had the right to imprison and put to death those who disobeyed their understanding of the law. Now, these short stories of the early apostles, including the disciples of Jesus, are all about severing themselves from the authority of the Jewish ruling council. The council was to have no authority, according to Luke's second volume, no authority over the followers of Jesus living the life of agape love. Now let's look at the first short story. Peter's sermon following Pentecost, in which he just outright blames the Jewish leadership for the crucifixion of Jesus. He said, Let all the house of Israel therefore know assuredly that God has made him Lord and Christ, this Jesus whom you crucified. Now, you see, this sermon that Peter preached was that there was a new authority enabling them to lead a life of agape love. And this new authority replaced the Jewish council. And the new authority was the Paraclete, the enabler, the advocate of living a life of agape love. And Peter in this sermon says, folks, you crucified him, and we are going to obey you. Then another story of the lame man being healed through the presence of Peter and John. New followers were following Jesus. The priests and the leaders of the temple were ticked off. They were annoyed and threatened and arrested these witnesses and put them in prison, as recorded in Acts 4. Again, the string of Jewish authority over their life of faith was being severed. You can put us in prison, but you can't imprison agape love. It's on the move. Then we have the story of the apostles following another imprisonment, witnessing, and they were telling the stories of Jesus. The council required Peter and other witnesses to stand before the council. They were charged with disobedience. And you know how Peter responded? We must obey God rather than men. Acts 5:29. Again, the string of Jewish authority, the council, that Sanhedrin, over their life, it was severed. Then Luke includes the short story of the convert by the name of Stephen. He was young, he was popular, he was a powerful witness, and Stephen was charged with disobeying the council. His defense included these words to the council in Acts 7:51, 58, that area. Stephen's defense was, you stiff-necked people, uncircumcised in heart and ears, you always resist the Holy Spirit. End of quote. And the response of the council was clear. Following this exchange, they cast him out of the city and stoned him to death. And Luke concludes this account of cutting the string of authority by the early apostles with the prelude to the next chapter in the life of the early movement with this statement: Saul was consenting to the death of Stephen. Now, with these short stories, Peter's sermon, the imprisonment, the appearance before the council, and the stoning of Stephen, that just as Jesus, one by one, cut the strings attached to him because he was a Jew, the early movement had to repeat this experience of faith being a commitment to a life of agape love, no longer under the authority of the Jewish council. They were enabled by the presence of the Holy Spirit, not the okay of the council. And so the Paraclete, the advocate for agape love, replaced the Jewish council as the authority over their life of faith. The community, having received the gift of the Spirit, cut the last string attached the authority of the Jewish council. Thus endeth the first 7 chapters of the Acts of the Sent Ones. Now we need to pause to remember that being governed by the spirit of agape love does not give permission to a follower of Jesus to do whatever they want to do, because there's no law against it. The early movement of the followers of Jesus was not permission to do your own thing. It was a common commitment to do the God thing. Experience the transformation of agape love, living for the other rather than for oneself. You see, the temptation of Jewish followers of Jesus was to fall back on the law. The temptation of the Gentile followers of Jesus was to do your own thing. But the story of the early movement was saying no to the temptation that Jewish Christians were facing, no to the temptation that Gentile Christians were facing to do their own thing, but rather to do the God thing, agape love. For the governance was in God's Spirit, no longer the Jewish council. You see, from this point on, the composition of the early movement was clear. Both Jewish Christians and Gentile Christians. But what they had in common was that they were going to be governed not by a council of men, not by their own independent understanding of what they wanted to do, but they were going to be governed by the Paraclete, the advocate beside them in every life situation, to be agents of agape love. The last string has now been cut from the authority of the Jewish council. Now, for your thought and conversation, first of all, what are your illustrations in 2025 of the tension between the authority of the human community and the authority of agape love in your own faith community? Secondly, what are your personal experiences of facing the choice of being governed in matters of faith by the human community over against fulfilling your commitment to the way of agape love? And finally, what are your stories of persons or groups doing their own thing, claiming to be led by the Holy Spirit with no evidence of agape love in their attitudes or their actions? Enjoy your journey. Thank you.